Hello, welcome back. It is week 158 on Out on That Line podcast. I'm Jeff with my co-host Alex. As always, Alex, how you doing this week?
I've been a nasty girl. I've been a nasty girl. Is somebody gonna match my freak? I had to get another one. I saw it, and this one is called "Bury It Alive."
That's
Um,
so good.
I can't wait for this one. Let's have a little taste.
I think you're full like Stockholm Syndrome by Liquid Death at this point.
Oh wow! So it tastes alcoholic, but I know it's not. Off to a rough start with "Bury It Alive."
Well, it may have fermented. So it may not have been intended to be alcoholic. It may be there now, though.
Wow, when I first started drinking Celsiuses, because I'm a regular Celsius drinker now, I remember the first time I was like, these are fucking stupid and they taste like shit, but maybe I should try a different flavor and not be rushed to judgment. Now I've had them all and I have favorites. So I can't be letting that happen with Liquid Death. Okay. You become a Celsius girly, people will let it slide, but you become a Liquid Death douchebag. Next thing you know, you got a neck tattoo of Satan's butthole.
You're gonna start
Can't
wearing
do it.
those. You're gonna start wearing those grunt style
Oh,
shirts.
yeah. Holy dive. Ah!
I saw this one. This guy had on it in the showroom the other day. It said BDE on there. Everybody knows what that stands for, right? But on the back it said Big Dad Energy, and then it had the grunt style thing on the sleeve there. And
Cool.
yeah, it was about 3 sizes too small for a man that was about 30 years past his glory days.
Yeah,
And
dude.
yeah, just was I mean, you see them all the time, especially down here in Texas. I don't know how many of those you see up in Vermont, but when you see them, you know who they're voting for, I guess, when it comes down to.
Oh, yeah. Dudes rock.
Yeah.
Dudes rock. No,
Yeah.
you don't see people like that in Portland. Hipster century.
Yeah.
It's just like, ugh.
Yeah. That's be grateful. You get plenty of rednecks up there, just not that kind. That's a good thing. That's a
Yeah,
very,
pretty
very good
much.
thing. Well, this week we're going to talk about Fontaines DC and the new album Romance. But first, I asked Alex before we started recording if he'd heard about this little snafu with Jane's Addiction, and he said no. So, are you familiar with who Jane's Addiction is, Alex?
I am familiar with the broad strokes of Jane's Addiction.
Okay, that's all we need here. We're good. So, at a show recently, I can't remember what city it was in. I should have looked it up, but it doesn't matter. At a show recently, they've like kind of recently gotten back together. You know, Dave Navarro was away from the band for a long time. Fantastic guitar player. I think his pop culture persona overshadowed how good of a musician he is. But he played with Red Hot Chili Peppers for a little while. He's played with Jane's Addiction, multiple other bands he's been involved with. But very, very, very good guitar player. Probably among the better reasons that Jane's Addiction ever really sounded that good. The other most important part of Jane's Addiction is Perry Farrell, the lead singer, the founder of Lollapalooza. What's another band that's like pretty famous to? I'm blanking on the name. Not quite as famous as Jane's Addiction. So they're playing a show. Perry Farrell pretty famously has some issues with substances. So we'll say whether they be injectables, smokables, or drinkables. Pretty famous for drinking an entire bottle of wine during concerts. I don't know if you've played that game, Alex. I can drink an entire bottle of wine. Not sure I want to be doing it in front of a crowd full of people when I have to perform and they paid for tickets. Like, no thanks. I don't want to play that game. Apparently, he plays it every single time they play. Um, he gets hammered. Maybe he's on something else, but all of a sudden, his eyes just like do that thing where they pop open and he looks like he's on another planet. Like, he doesn't know where he's at. Afterwards, he claimed it was sound issues. Like, his voice wasn't high enough in the mix, whatever it might be. What he ends up doing is going over to Dave Navarro and shoving him and throwing a punch after like staring at him and yelling at him for a second. The roadies all rush onto the stage, grab Perry Farrell, run him out. They end the show, and they have since announced that they are ending the band once again. Um, just a wild turn of events for one of the kind of premier bands of the 90s rock era. You know, there was the grunge era, you had Jane's Addiction that was kind of associated with that, but they were for a few songs, couple albums, like very, very famous. And to see them go out like that, like Perry Farrell's got to be 60 plus years old, if not damn close to it. And you're still out there running and gunning like that. Just absolutely insane to me that he's gone this long. And when you see him, I like implore you to go watch that video, and you folks at home to go watch that video as well, because that dude was not in the same room as everybody else.
It sounds to me like a little coke boogie got dislodged and he started it. We've all been around people that have done the power up. You know what I mean? Like they're going hard all night and then things kind of crystallize back there. And then you're sitting there. And I'm thinking of a very specific person that Jeff and I both know. And you look across the way and they're kind of subdued and they just, they're back in the game, baby. Powered up. It sounds like that's what happened to this guy. But it also sounds like potentially something stronger than Coke, to which I question what could that have possibly been? Can you snort PCP? So, yeah, you know what? Here for a good time, not a long time. And they actually
Yeah,
were here for a long time. It wasn't all that good.
yeah, he's on his way, I think, to something bad. But I guess there was a show like way back when they first started, and they were opening for God, again, I can't remember, but he said something like they were playing in a town. He's like, "This town sucks. I can't even find heroin here." Like during the show. I mean, if that tells you anything about his proclivities, things he enjoys. So I'm sure there was a mixture of a few things, but I implore everybody to go watch that video. If nothing else, as a cautionary tale, like if you're a rock star currently and you're drinking a bottle of wine every night when you're on stage, maybe cut it back a little bit.
Yeah, this has been a friendly PSA from the folks at Out on That Line. And if nothing else that is accomplished by this show, we're always looking out for you guys. And that means letting you know when you're off the rails, letting you know when your life is in danger, letting you know when you're weak, you're out of control, and you've become an embarrassment to yourself and everyone around you. But we also, in addition to calling you out, intervention, 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 in addition, we have the cure. And you can find it at youtube.com/C/out on that line. Subscribe, turn on notifications, hit the bell, smash that like button, leave a comment for the algorithm. You can do it all, a hole in the wall where the folks can see it all over at youtube.com/C/out on that line.
That was well done. You killed the dog? Sick. So what do you
That
say we
right in
talk a
there.
little bit about Fontaines DC and their album Romance? So I had seen buzz about this band, basically, more centered around this album, and I'd heard of them before, but I had zero familiarity with Fontaines DC going into this album. So I'm wondering if it was something you were aware of, had listened to previously, um, and kind of what you knew about it and why you picked this one.
Um, So, yes, I was slightly familiar with them through Rough Trade. It's not what you think. Through the organization Rough Trade. Um, the record store in New York City, I was browsing around and I saw Doggerel, which was their debut album, which came out in 2019, according to my notes. So I remember seeing it there and being like, this, and like you kind of look it up, and you're like, oh, this could be interesting. Didn't think much more of it. And then in 2020, when they came out with A Hero's Death, that got super rave reviews. And I checked that out and I was like, oh, this is like pretty like excellent punky shit. Very much in line with bands like Shame, increasingly something like Idols. And then on this album, they really took a turn in what I would say is a positive direction, and we'll get to that. But I'm curious if you went back and listened to any other Fontaines DC, or did you stick to the assignment?
I listened to this one a few times, and I went and kind of selected, like looked at their other, so on Spotify, all of their most popular songs right now, like that top 5 they give you is all songs from this album. So I
Yeah.
couldn't find any there. I kind of went to I went to Genius, where we get our lyrics, and they kind of tell you on the albums, like how many people have looked at the song. So that's a kind of trick to figure out what the real hits are on any given album by any artist, because the ones that are going to have the most views, they're the ones people are most curious about. They're getting played the most. Um, I went back and listened. I think they did skew more the same way Idols did, with their latest album, like did skew more towards a more melodic kind of direction rather than a straight like punk rock kind of direction.
Mhm.
And I think I would consider Fontaines DC, at least as far as what I had listened to, was probably an additional like 7 or 8 songs over the previous couple albums they did. Um, Not quite as heavy as Idols gets sometimes, but where Idols gets dark as far as like kind of talking about violence and like beating people up and stuff like that and expressing that anger that way, there's a I feel like more of a darkness to Fontaine's DC. And I feel like the darkness of the lyrics really matched well with the kind of discordant synth tones you were getting it through a lot of this album, through a lot of the, where they went kind of electronic, instead of the straight, like just distorted guitars. I always felt like those had a very common kind of theme to them, where it's a very introspective sort of self hatred, and where it was sometimes hard to listen to because I think you start to wonder, like, everybody's kind of felt that way, whether it's a consistent thing or not. Everybody's had these same kind of feelings. So when they go to this dark place musically, and then they go to the dark place lyrically, and you are really trying to like analyze this album, you're not going to be able to help but feel every bit of that. And I really appreciate the kind of tongue in cheek sort of tones they took, the in it that we were talking about before the podcast. So they had an identity throughout the whole album. So just drawing a straight comparison to Idols or Shame is not trying to say that they're like lifting that style or anything, because there was even some like Oasis in this too.
Yes. Yep.
And it's when we got the same, I think a good comparison is like Sabrina Carpenter and her album. There was a lot of genre hopping, but it was never trying to like ape those genres. Like there's a lot of influences clearly in this music, and I don't know how much a contemporary like Shame or Idols can be like an influence on them. More of they probably just all are influenced by the same thing, since they're kind of concurrent bands right now. Um, they do their own thing with that. Like it provides a different experience where Idols felt more aggressive in their approach, which I certainly appreciate. Fontaine's DC seems a little bit more like philosophical in theirs.
Well, and they exist pretty firmly in that liminal space between like post punk and new wave, because those are both like pretty broad. You can have things as different as Elvis Costello and Talking Heads that technically occupy the same space but couldn't be more different. But then you find these little like flecks of common DNA. Um, and so I think Fontaine's DC is like more firmly in that area, whereas something like, especially the album Tank for Idols, skews into that heavier stuff. But on this one, like looking into their approach to it, saying things like, they were inspired by Japanese manga and Italian cinema. And knowing that before I went into this album and listening to it, you absolutely hear that. They build like cityscapes. They can create the feeling of, buildings collapsing or a sad rainy night in your town. Like I see the manga anime like sad loner on the rainy night. I see giant sprawling cities. I see like Tokyo. They do a really, really, really good job. They say they write visually because they think it creates, you have to reach out and get a very specific sound. So instead of starting off and being like, this is in the key of A minor, and like this is what I want to do, and these are the beats per minute and blah. They think cinematically and then put a sound to it, and it forces them to become more creative. So I think I agree that there's a more like direct angry, brash approach to Idols, even though that album was, by their own admission, a love album.
Yeah.
I didn't find this even when it got kind of dark and sarcastic. I never found it like depressing and heavy or inaccessible in any way. Again, I think because the things that they're playing with song wise buy them some of that goodwill that this never gets bogged down. This could have become like seriously solipsistic, "Ooh, woe is me" kind of stuff, and they avoid that entirely. And it's not necessarily like tongue in cheek funny, like something like Pup or Idols
Mhm.
would do. Um, but it doesn't take itself too seriously, but isn't taking a piss out of itself, mate. Um, so I just thought like they took some really creative chances with this one that made it very rewarding.
Yeah, I love the intro, the opening song, the self-titled song, "Romance." I love the intro to that because immediately I love that you said it they write visually, because I just felt like I was in a lonely city in the rain, when I was listening to that, and I don't know if that's exactly what they were going for, but I think the fact that it makes you feel something, like, it could have felt different for you, but the fact that it makes it feel like something, like you're a different place than wherever you're listening to that album is a really, really important thing that they've found they can do that they know how to execute. And when you can kind of convey a mood like that, and they ping pong between doing like guitar heavy songs and like synth heavy songs and kind of acoustic type like ballad type songs. Like they ping pong between this stuff without you ever feeling like you're not in the same album. And we always talk about that as being a real positive, and it doesn't have to be a concept album for everything to work together. You don't have to have like a linear storyline that you're telling throughout each song for everything to be able to work together. I think you need to understand it either needs to have common emotions, common like musicality. There needs to be a common thread that goes through it. And I think they find, even though some of the songs are very stark lyrically, and some are, a little bit more, they expound a little more, they go a little more into describing details instead of kind of leaving it abstract for you. It never feels like a different album. And I think when you can put so much of your personality, like I feel like with the thing I love about Idols is you feel their personality through that music. Like you hear never fight a man with a perm. And you hear that opening chord, and then you hear what's his name, Ian something. I don't know what the lead singer's name is of that band, but he's like Bro Cream, creatine. It's like you get such a sense of like who they are. And I feel like Fontaines DC through this album, as well as the other, probably handful to 10 songs I listened to off the other albums, they carve out their own identity while still maintaining their hold on this genre.
Yeah, and I think they have a distinct identity, but also their influences are like readily available right on the surface. Like you said, you hear a lot of Oasis on this. You hear a lot of Alice in Chains, Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, and again for a space like post punk and they're not new wave. They're like on half the time like on the cusp of post punk. Like what they're doing on this one is hard to categorize, and yet it leans into kind of a 90s alternative, 90s grunge aesthetic again without playing that up, right? Like it's a gimmick. It never reaches that point. You just hear the influences all over it. Especially in the guitar work on this, the guitar tones, just these like you can have everything from like jangly guitars to heavy ass riffs. Um, they're really, really able to. It's cool how they can hop around technique wise and try these new things and add production elements that they've never really been able to add to their other music, to something like Doggerel. Um, because their ethos has always been if you can't play it live, don't do it. And then they finally on this one were like, you know what? We're gonna make this more of a studio album and like, why limit ourselves? Fuck it, we'll figure it out.
Mhm.
We just have to give this a shot. And I think through that came a lot of invention, a lot of opportunities to try stuff on. Yeah, I was very impressed with a lot of what I heard on here musically.
The I like that you mentioned Nirvana as an influence, that song Death Kink.
Mhm.
Just straight up, like, it sounded like the Nirvana Unplugged
Yeah.
album, like, that guitar tone that they had in there, so good. Hoarseness is the whatness. The end of that song had such a heavy, like, synth breakdown. It was like the last 20 seconds of it. But it just when it hit so hard. I was like, "Damn." And it gave me the same feeling. I don't know if you listened through this whole album because I don't think we covered it on the show in full, but the Turnstile Glow On album,
I've listened to it.
like that to me, that's obviously way more on the hardcore side than this is, but a song like Underwater Boy, is a song that Fontaines DC might do. And that what I loved about Turnstile Glow On was the amount of times I was surprised the first time that I listened through that album. Like things that I didn't expect to have in a certain particular place. Lyrics I didn't expect to hear, like an amount of energy in a place I didn't expect there to be. The way they'd bring back, like they'd change how they were doing a riff by, the drummer doing a different time signature or something like that. Just got so creative with how they chose to build that album. And this album by Fontaines DC gave me the same feeling. I don't know if I like it quite as much as that Glow On album because that's like an all time great for me. This, I don't know if it reaches that level, but this, I think, I remember being really excited about the Idols Tank album. I think this is right there with that. I know the Shame album we did, like, this is right there with that. I mean, there's just bodies of work that are excellent that I don't think I need to consider like all time great. But if there's albums I'm going to point to, I'm like, oh, if you want to get into this genre, Romance by Fontaines DC is going to be in there. The Shame album is going to be in there. Like if these are the ones that to me represent this the best.
And if you like The Cure, and you like The Smiths, and you like Alice in Chains, and you like Smashing Pumpkins, and you like Idols, like there's a lot to draw upon from this one, or a lot that they draw upon, and there's a lot to love. Um, like you said, like, and I noticed this too, like moving in a much more melodic direction and kind of moving away from a heavier sound. There were just a lot of great swings taken on this one. Um, I would say my two favorite songs are Starburster and Favorite by
Hmm.
Country Mile.
Yeah.
And if that makes me a basic bitch, it makes me a basic bitch. But the little like the gasps on
Yeah.
Starburster, like it's great touches.
Yeah, so that's the ad libs. That I don't think there were like a ton on the album, but that part of it where he's doing this, and the first time I listened to it, I was like, what is that? Like when you hear that gasp for air. And then you realize just how like clever that is to have in the song. Like it brings another layer of depth. Like it lets you in on another like part of the emotion. Oh, there's stress involved here too. And it's just like adds so much with it just being a sound. It's like the same thing as a guitar note adding something to a song. It's so important to, I feel like, and it also takes a lot of confidence to do something like that because it's like at its base level doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. Like the idea that it's going to add that much to the song, kind of outlandish of an idea. To have the commitment to really like know how good that's going to be when you put it all together, that's the same level of care they put in the rest of the album. That's just such a good like boiled down example of so many things that make this album good.
It's put together, as you say, in the same way with the same level of like care and craftsmanship as someone like King is, because that could be a absolute fucking mess. It could be a total clown show if there wasn't a lot of thought, a lot of intention, and a lot of inspiration behind it. Um, and I think that's true here. It's like a very fully formed, very like lovingly crafted album. A step in an interesting direction for their sound. Again, I can't say I'm like the biggest Montaigne's DC guy, but consider my toes fully dipped. And at the end of the day, I'm just looking for a little something different. It doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't have to be outrageous for outrageous' sake. I'm just looking for something that's not, even if it's not doing something brand new, it's not like the rest of the stuff I'm listening to. This is not like Sturgill Simpson. Sturgill Simpson is not like Dr. Dog. Dr. Dog is not like King Giz. King Giz is not like Sabrina Carpenter. All of these things exist independently and are on my little musical plate. And I just love when something else comes along and goes, "Oh, let's see, you got all these other little treats in your Hungry Man dinner. How about this? I'm a fucking brownie, dog. I'm a little plop of applesauce, okay? The applesauce is over the brownie, a rough move, but you can appreciate it more when you're an old man." Um, so yes, I would say this is as nourishing and interesting and delightful as a Hungry Man dinner, and for that, I will give it a stream it.
That I'm gonna say for this one, I think stream it is the more logical answer, but
Mhm.
I'm gonna say buy it on this one because I really enjoyed this as a whole album. Like it's not like it just had a bunch of standout songs. I had my favorites, but I'm gonna say a full on buy it on this one because I am thinking I might because I have a CD player now, so I don't have to spend as much on it.
Yeah, there you go. The thing is, it's an I might for me too, so I don't know, I guess for the first time in show history, changing a rating, I gotta bump it up to a buy it because I might, and I think it's worth it. I think you should stream it, but the rating is buy it. How about that?
That's yes, I like it. I like how we're talking there. Well, folks, let us know down in the comments what you thought of the Fontaines DC album. And if you haven't listened to it yet, definitely suggest you go do that. And like Alex said, go check out our other videos. You'll find them at youtube.com/C// out on that line. Make sure you like and subscribe. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you hate. Don't downvote, though. That's not good for the algorithm. Comments and upvotes, that'll get our attention, even if it's negative. You can say whatever you want in there. You don't like my shirt? Tell us. You don't like Alex's hat? You think a purple one would have been better? Tell us. Until next time.